Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussion. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and engaging conversations as they happen. I am pleased to again have at this table Zach Benedict, who is the principal for MKM Architecture and Design, Andrew Gritzmaker, the CEO for Habitat for Humanity in Greater Fort Wayne, Heather Presley Cowan, who is the CEO and founder of Your Housing Resource and Club 720, and Andrew Hoffman, the Director of Marketing for Synapis, and the former Executive Director of Neighborhood. Welcome. So this is really part two of our conversation on the issues around housing. And our last conversation, I think, was really more proving that it is a tremendous issue, and there's lots to unpack with it, and from the federal level, and then the state level, and the local level, and it goes from everything from regulations to the issues of focusing on people. And I think what we came away with was that we were going to focus on that it's not rational and the issues of people. But the reason that I have invited the four of you to be part of this conversation of when really looking at something that is not necessarily rational is because you are the thought leaders and you are the individuals who are out there every day doing things and looking at these issues. And the way that I see you, and in your role sort of here at this table, is Zach, you're the visionary, and you really are a problem solver, and I think you really truly do try to bring in a holistic approach to solutions when it comes to creating quality of place environments in which people will live. Heather, I really see you as the policy maker, and you are a solutions-oriented program creator and provider. And Andrew Gritzmaker, you oversee a nonprofit, Habitat for Humanity, that has proven and tested time of helping people solve the issue of being able to afford housing and to own homes. But you've also put on, sort of twisted the idea of how a nonprofit uses its money and becomes a profitable entity within that, and also benefiting the people who ultimately get to own the homes. And Andrew, in your former role with Neighborhood Link, really are the boots on the ground expert in really dealing with the day-to-day of what happens with people in their neighbors and neighborhoods with housing issues and maintenance. And then also, I'm putting you up a notch now because you also have gone through the process, because unfortunately in your new job, you're leaving Fort Wayne, about being the seller and then also probably a buyer. Sure. So you're bringing that perspective. So for this part of the conversation, I want to get down and drill down to Fort Wayne and how we are doing and the problems or difficulties that we are having in creating the type of housing for the people in our community. So who wants to start?
One of the things I was working on in the last couple of years at NeighborLink, and just trying to better understand trying to get at a micro neighborhood level in many of these neighborhoods, is looking at there's natural housing life cycles or individual life cycles where people can buy homes, say in our late 20s, early 30s. Many people in this generation that are living in the house, they live there for a while, maybe they transition, but maybe they live there 20 or 30 years. They hit a point where they're able to continue to live independently, but the housing is no longer the right kind of housing for them. Yet either economically or the lack of the proper housing, they can't naturally transition, which this housing life cycle kind of stalls at some point. And healthy neighborhoods are those that are really turning over, that people are coming and going, choosing the opportunities that they want to choose on a consumer driven, but they have exit points. And for those that buy a house and live in a house for a long time, sometimes we miss our exit point because we don't want to, we can't. There's a whole lot of reasons why people don't exit a particular house. maybe the housing that they need, they want to stay, but the housing that they need doesn't exist. Curious from your guys' perspective, how you've thought about that in terms of some of our neighborhoods, they're not turning over in the way that allows new people to come in and take over and privatize the redevelopment of housing, where at 20 or 30, I have the most income, I want to buy a house, I want to renovate it, yet there aren't opportunities. And so some of us are trying to figure out how do we take those opportunities and incentivize or change or protect those. But curious from your thoughts on how a neighborhood turns over the different housing or what gets stuck.
Zach?
It seems to be more effective when there's a robust localized leadership.
And are you saying that we don't have that?
A lot of neighborhoods don't.
On the neighborhood level or
Yeah.
the, okay.
No, the neighborhood, yeah, it won't happen at the city level, it's at the neighborhood level. And part of it is because we don't have a lot of community networks that are more locally controlled, like churches used to be such a critical part of neighborhood, aside from any spiritual value, right? It was, at least at minimum one time a week where a group of an insider group met to discuss not only bigger picture issues, philosophy, moral understandings, but also the local politics of the area and what we as a group were going to decide was going to happen in our community. With the inability to have that relationship with your neighbors in a suburban context, you have no mechanism to decide or onboard new members into the group, which means you don't know them as well as you would know the person who's lived next to you for 15 years, which I would classify that as a crisis.
Well, that's the crisis of loneliness.
Yeah,
or that we're
I would classify that as a crisis.
And your crisis is the belief of the whole idea of privacy and being independent, right?
I think over 36 million people in this country live in a home by themselves.
Right.
Upwards of 60% of them can go an entire month without a face-to-face contact with someone they care about.
Right. And I would be a perfect example of that. If I joke, if I didn't have a dog, I could never leave my apartment. And I sort of, with my neighbors, when I was younger and living in Europe, we used to play this game of like, how long would it take for someone to realize like you fell in the shower? Now, when we were going to an office or something, that would be, I figured, and my mother was alive, I figured I could go 48 hours. But now, I figured they might not find me until I start to smell or, something. So I think you're right. And that's the fastest growing segment of the housing population is people living alone, both younger, because people are getting married later, or if they're not getting married at all, and also at the older end because baby boomers want to age in place. So you would say is that a crisis of housing, or is that a crisis of our social?
No, I'm sure it's the growing housing stock is a response to the market demand. We've got this weird instinct to correlate isolation and independence with success. We use loneliness as a litmus test whether or not we could be independent, and then deal with the realities of that later. There's a lot of, in your housing discussion, there's a lot of...
In my housing, in our house, let's let you know.
There's a lot of research we know on the impact of solitary confinement on prisoners. It's a really well-documented body of research that I rarely see brought up when we talk about this epidemic of loneliness, but a large sector of the population probably felt that over the last year. In solitary confinement, within 5 days, you can start displaying autistic behavior. Like the cognitive decay is quick, fast, and violent. But if in Indiana, if we're talking local, between 2005 and 2040, the state's population is supposed to grow by about 15%. 65 and older population grows by 90%. In rural communities, that's probably closer to 130%, and a third of them probably won't be able to drive. So couple that with what we know happens to you cognitively when you're by yourself for that long, that's a crisis. Is it something that will be remedied by the housing stock? Probably not. It won't move fast enough. And there's other reasons where privacy is desirable.
Except for millennials. They don't understand privacy. They live their world everyone to see it on social media. So I
No,
don't know.
they don't.
Some
they
do,
they
but
want
I
to
just
they
like
want to
some.
show you what they've done well. There's a big difference.
Okay.
And actually, people that use social media platforms that don't have facial recognition almost always admit to being lonelier than those that don't.
So, Andrew, in your work,
Doesn't
I know
help.
that you had one project where you had like a vast amount of land where you almost did like a development in a sense, as opposed to the inline housing. So when you created that, do you then help the homeowners create a community or make that like a neighborhood, or you really, you build it, I mean, is that a concern for you do you worry about this kind of issue of loneliness and?
Well, I mean, Zach brings up a really good point. There's a lot of lonely people and a lot of rentable space to help subsidize or reduce the burden of housing costs for individuals. So it's a very interesting topic all in itself. Habitat creates homeowners. We're not in the community creating business. And that sounds really harsh, but there are other people doing that work. My job is to be a very cost-effective residential home builder that prepares people well to be successful, make their payments, and then it's not a dream maker after that. It's not figuring out how to get them to college or their kids on a vacation or through marching band. So what we do, and earlier you were talking about just the depth of information. If we went all those different directions, we would be so ineffective. And I would argue that we have over the past 34 years to produce on average 7 homes a year. We're terribly ineffective at home building. So we either have to get effective, right? And you brought up last year was eight homes that we built. And my response was, it was nothing. In terms of attacking the problem of providing home ownership opportunities, my specific problem, if people are seeking that avenue. But it's everything to those 8 families that have now just ended generational poverty.
Okay.
First time homeowners ever. Understanding what equity is, right? Understanding the power that comes with that and the upward mobility, that this is not a forever home for you. This is a way that you can invest in yourself, that you can reduce the volatility of your life in general. You can roll with the punches better. You can set yourself up for success. And then we know all the other things that come with that. Housing, when you grow up in an owner-occupied situation, your kids are better educated, they're healthier, more likely.
More stable, right.
Yeah, so all these things.
Right.
Going back to your question, though, about building community, I would say it showed up, and just full transparency, I was not part of Fuller's Landing development. Typically, you see those types of developments when there's land scarcity. Let's think Nashville. You're not getting any free land downtown. Right, so you go build your own, right?
Right.
That's your option.
Right.
And after that, then you're probably going into multifamily units. You become a commercial contractor, not a residential. We have tons of land available here in Fort Wayne. I came in on the tail end of those last 3 houses, and I would say, to your point about community, we are really struggling with transferring HOA management to this group
HOA is
a homeowners association, and the very nature of that is to build community. Understanding that you all have something to benefit from protecting your property values, for enforcing a certain set of rules to make sure that there's not a degradation of your personal property. And we're really struggling with that, right? So I would say a well-functioning HOA, and most of the time, we'll probably have a pretty well-connected community with a shared understanding of values and beliefs and morals. And that's really hard. Not to say that it's impossible, but that's just one thing where you pull a lot of people out of Southeast Allen and you put them up here on an island, and now we're trying to figure out how we play well together and protect each other.
Right.
We've got enough land for another 67 homes up there, phase 2 and phase 3. Now, one is capital. You need capital to develop.
Right.
But the
And you
other
figured
thing
out a
is-
way to get that capital. Right?
Well, potentially. There's a lot of avenues, but I guess going back to the community standpoint, my biggest apprehension, I could go to a bank right now and get a construction line of credit and we could be off and running. We're not ready to build more on that community until we get that community super well functioning.
Okay, so, but you're reliant on maybe for that HOA and getting them, that would probably be something like Neighborhood Link, right? So what do you think makes for a successful HOA?
It's neighbors wanting to truly be connected with one another for the sake of a greater good perspective of enough people understanding that this is a long-term investment beyond my own personal property, that I'm willing to spend time and navigate really not fun projects many times. Like, I rarely show up to neighborhood association meetings and it be an exciting, productive thing, unless there's a group of people that really enjoy being with one another and are willing to do the hard work of solving problems nobody else wants to solve. And that's ultimately the hard part of how do you build that kit. The community can only build it if they want to. We're outside agents and we can build relationships and we can incentivize certain behavior or reward through programs that help simply just get more people working together and getting to know each other, and maybe see some like glimpses of long-term impact from short-term gain. But it's really complicated, and the neighbors really have to want to do it.
And has there been any research or proof that, I would just think when you have more diverse minds or people with different backgrounds who bring different things to the table, you actually could be more successful than less successful? So the idea of wanting to not have all your neighbors think like you, look like you, would actually make your HOA more engaging and impactful?
Of course. I mean, it's proven in the workplace for sure. So, I mean, but you know, it could be your first leadership position should you seek to want to do something in the leadership realm. An HOA, unfortunately, HOAs have typically been a force to keep people out of neighborhoods. And so you have to almost revolutionize the idea behind the HOA. And, you know, we get together and have a glass of wine and talk about life and how much we love this community we're building together. That's different than those people down there put up a 6-foot fence, tell them to cut it down. That conversation, unfortunately, is why people get fatigued and don't get involved, and why most millennials don't think they're necessary.
Right. And do you think that the idea of like this whole idea of privacy, like, you know, everybody has to have their own, you know, when I go and you look at houses and they have their own you know, child's playground equipment, or they have a pool, or they, you know, instead of building at the park and you know, for the community, and then you have that engagement, is it the problem that, I mean, I sort of think, are we all too narcissistic and we all want people want McMansions where they don't even talk to the people in their own family. They don't even know where they are in the house. I mean,
if I'm working 2 jobs to keep that payment made every month, I just don't have time.
Okay.
And if I'm a single mom and I've got a choice between attending this neighborhood association meeting or spending it with my kids, I'm gonna pick my kids. Okay. I just think it's more of a practicality issue, and the way that we have done life together in the past is just different, and HOAs need to follow along with that.
Okay, but do you think that that's possibly, see, what I sort of think is it possibly also with the developers? Because I feel like, just like with your project, we create these fake, what I call neighborhoods. They're like these developments, right? And because land is so is cheap here, basically, we keep pushing further and further out. Like you look southwest and northwest, and Fort Wayne is, every day I read in the paper about new projects and new affordable housing, but my feeling is all we're doing is we're taking people farther and farther away from each other and putting them in these fake sort of neighborhoods that really don't also do what most people want, you know.
It's a consumer decision though, Sarah. Like, people buy those homes. They're full of people that want to be there.
I know. I don't understand them, but okay.
Sure. But the point is that we all have a consumer decision, most of us, especially in those situations. And even if, depending on the neighborhood, we look at what's in front of us and we give the time and energy and resource to the things that are most pressing. And when those that are involved heavily in HOAs or neighborhood associations are in a position of stability in life overall, that are evaluating their own time and energy of what matters most to me. So in any neighborhood or in every house, you protect the thing that you are most invested into. So if you bought a house or you're renting, or even if you're just looking at your personal property, I'm in a protective mindset, not a generous collaborative mindset. I'm protecting my asset.
Right.
And if you have a family, you're protecting your family.
Absolutely.
And so we look from a perspective of protection.
Right.
And to get beyond that requires stability or resource.
Okay, which is why also I have a big problem.
And that's a mindset.
Right,
Again,
right.
I mean,
Okay.
when we talk about the value of community and
Right.
reciprocity and happiness, how it's tied to
Right,
all of these
exactly.
things.
Happiness is tied to reciprocity.
Oh my goodness, it is. I mean, if the trees do it with us, right? I breathe out, it
Right.
breathes in, you know, whatever. It's a fact of life.
Right.
And when we create these communities that are cut off, and you know, I'm glad we're talking. Fuller's Landing is a good example of. In this case, it was a nonprofit developer. I was consulting and helped with Fuller's Landing for the state. I was working with the state when Fuller's Landing was going in, and I think the things you're saying, Andrew, are so powerful because as a developer chooses where to go, in this case, a nonprofit developer chose to go to a place that was disconnected from maybe even transportation.
Sure.
In some cases, but buses don't run that
Right.
far, and so if you look at the impact of transportation on income and those kinds of things, affordability is a huge deal. So in that case, we might have created a pocket of individuals who are all actually not diverse.
They are.
And so
When you look at it from an economic standpoint, you nailed it. They're all in the same economic boat. They may look differently and their family dynamics are different, but that mindset is the same. Pretty much uniformly, and I don't want to, I'm painting with a broad stroke, right? And I'm overgeneralizing, but what we're seeing now is opportunities like with Jamie Lancia out in Victoria Lakes and New Haven. We're putting Habitat families next to individuals that have chosen to build a $300,000 house.
Right.
We're artificially creating income diversity.
Right.
Right. And I think we're going to see better results.
But aren't we doing that? But aren't we also doing that with downtown? Like in my building, 8 apartments at Superior Lofts go for
yes.
for lower income.
So, there's a little bit of a difference in that. Maybe in that case, there was a financing mechanism that came into the deal in the capital stack that led to that,
Right. Well,
which is great.
Right.
I mean, I would definitely say Real America, but we have to note, Jamie Lancia, he just said the name. Jamie Lancia is a developer who did not have to do this.
Right.
That mindset of saying there's value in even considering this, I would say Lancia was also the one in Renaissance Point who called for the review appraisal and said this house you are not going to take value out of this neighborhood. So a champion for that kind of change, Jamie was in early on some of these things.
And what was his thinking? I mean, you don't know but when you approached him on it, what did he say?
He cares deeply about the community. And he's an innovator. Mm-hmm. He's a home builder. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to learn from him. Early on, one of the families that he had built for called. As soon as we put the Habitat sign up, called and said, we didn't sign up to have a Habitat house next to us. And he said, let me send you the floor plan because their house is going to be bigger than yours. Right? And really just squash that mentality, And those families then are better able to, assimilation is a bad word, but they will go into that HOA system a lot more smoothly than a family that's all in the same economic boat where this is a first-generation homeowner.
Right.
They're light years away from
because you have that
HOA
diversity, and you have people who can learn from other people. And
spills over into all areas
Right.
of life. I'm going to meet someone I might be able to do business with someday, and now I have a home. Those are.
So are you? So and that's what the old, like what they were talking about when you look at neighborhoods and the type of housing that was built before the 1940s, like these, what we call that missing middle, where you could have the duplex where it's 2 apartments. And then the idea of what you need to make a neighborhood, the walkability and the resources, and you're going to see people, versus what we are building now. I mean, when I had Dodd from Zach's office on, and we talked about Piper Trail, which was a very innovative pocket neighborhood for people over 55, and I kept saying, but it's far out, and we talked about, well, are there sidewalks? I don't know. I just feel like, isn't there, and maybe this is partly zoning issues, or maybe it is partly our leadership. I just feel like we have so many empty buildings and stuff downtown that could be repurposed to this kind of housing that people want, or, even Dodd was telling me about in Pennsylvania, where they actually took an apartment building and made it, although it was all for 55 plus, and made it for people to live there. I mean, I think that you would want, like, the biggest thing I miss about living downtown is I don't see kids. I don't have children, but I love, to visit with them and then give them back. But I don't get to see kids. And the ones that were living in my building, they all lived there until they built a house.
Look, the last affordable housing development that was built there was what? Randall Lofts, maybe, and then we have the Landing, which is doing an excellent job.
So if
we're not intentionally doing this, it will become unaffordable for those folks. And they're mostly the market.
Okay, so how is Fort Wayne doing? With are we intentional? I don't know. Are we thinking about our zoning? Do we have the leadership? How are we doing?
We're just on the cusp. I think you have development, which is new stuff happening out, but then there's this whole idea of redevelopment where you're trying to go into areas like we get to get excited about potential and vision and can get frustrated by why people aren't doing X, Y, and Z, but they're the developers and have the resources. They get to make the decisions on what they want to do. We can ask them, we can show them, but it's ultimately up to them. But we're on a cusp of redevelopment in our town to where we now are revaluing or putting a high enough value on our marginalized or forgotten neighborhoods, whatever you want to call it, that we now see the economic potential and valuation to go in there and figure out these complex problems, which they are far more complex because they're full of people that don't want to be disrupted, or you got lots of factors. Or you can't just go in and buy 150 homes and tear them all down. We're not there yet. So the solutions are really complex, and you may need to tie in 5, 6, 7 different neighborhoods to get to the project where it makes economic sense. And so that takes a lot of collaboration, site development.
But that's also, but to credit of Heather, it's Bottle Works. I mean, that's a perfect example, right? You repurposed, it's in the Renaissance Point, you did a public-private, you got a nonprofit involved. I mean, what was it? Because I just feel in Fort Wayne, everybody works in these silos, and everybody works from scarcity, and nobody works from abundance, and they just fear what they're going to give up, not what they're going to get. So I'm curious, what is it like to have to get all of these people at the table and to get the right buy-in from leadership? And is it, do we have that, or is it a struggle, or are we on our way? What do you think?
I mean, I work a lot in the 10 counties around in Fort Wayne, although I work in Fort Wayne a lot, but differently. What I would say is in the 10 counties around Fort Wayne, it's extremely easy. I mean, you've got people who really understand the value of community, and I believe that exists here as well. We're just bigger. And so where a city like Indianapolis had, 13 CDCs, Community Development Corporations at one point, it was like having 13 kids for them. They're now seeing the value of, wow, we've got to have more neighborhood-based nonprofits working. NeighborLink, perfect example. If we had NeighborLinks all over Fort Wayne, if we could have replicated it 1,000 times, I have to believe that is the root and the core. If we had Habitat, almost like there's like this amalgamation of a Habitat that does new construction and a NeighborLink that does this, grassroots, neighborhood-focused kind of work. There is a very beautiful thing that happens when you have that marriage. And that housing system, unfortunately, we segment it by the verticals that tie to the money. So homelessness has money. Affordable, very low income, money. Section 8, money. If we were able to create middle income, well, it's private cash, right? That's me. I've now got equity in my home.
Because I make too much to get help, and I make too less to afford or have cash.
Right, so now I've got to start a business, or I've got to do something to get that gig economy going maybe. But the idea is if the housing spectrum were to be blended into a nice housing system with partners that really focused, like these entities did and do.
And also that they also know their expertise and what they're focusing on, but it's not from a scarcity.
But if we look at Vincent Village and say, oh, you help all the homeless people. No, they're dealing with systemic issues and conditions of a certain population. But if I point to them and say that's our housing provider for the community, that's wrong to them on so many levels, and it's wrong for the community because we think a problem's been solved that isn't being addressed.
But also, isn't it wrong? And the same thing with neighborhood link, which I sort of pose, is with Vincent Village, that's a religious organization. Neighborhood, although you have a diverse group, it was based from a religious entity.
That goes back to what Zach said, though.
Okay.
This is not proselytizing type religion.
Okay.
This is called activists getting
so
together under maybe a faith-based mission. But you don't have
maybe
to
it's
like
faith activism or activism.
Faith in action.
We have faith in activism or faith in action.
I think we're the city of churches. We should see that happening. In fact, I think it's a really great thing that happens. I mean, you look at the chapel coming into the Vincent Village community, the wonderful things that have happened. Faith in this community has done a huge amount of work. And unfortunately, then it gets misconstrued as being, you have to pledge Christ in order to be a part of their program, and that's just not true.
Well, some you do. I mean, what I've heard from homeless people, but that's another show.
Yeah, some do.
So Zach, you've been sitting and listening to this, and I'm curious because I sort of feel like I'm not sure if you agree with this or approach or.
We've had this conversation. Sorry, but we've had this conversation a lot.
Okay, so I want you to share your part of that conversation with us.
I don't believe systems have causal powers.
Meaning?
We keep talking about this like this system does this system does that.
Okay.
It does not work. People do things.
Okay.
So in the previous discussion when we were talking about the deficit of effective localized leadership, that wasn't a comment about a mayor. It was the fact that neighborhoods, at the neighborhood level, traditionally in a modern context have a hard time finding people that can lead them.
Okay.
Not everybody can do that well. That's not a skill set everyone has. In my neighborhood growing up, it was Sister Teresa. And she told everybody what to do, and everybody listened to her because she had a habit on. But she had a specific skill set that not every nun has either. My entire childhood would be different without her in it, for a lot of reasons, with or without religion.
Okay.
But that becomes, I think, the biggest problem. The way neighborhoods are built makes that job harder or easier.
The way that they're built now or the way that they were built?
The way they are built affects the leader's effectiveness.
But I'm asking you, is it the way that we're building these neighborhoods and developments now versus when you look at how neighborhoods...
No, I'm saying it's not binary. The built environment affects your ability to do that.
Okay.
Period.
Okay.
So some neighborhoods would be better for certain individuals. You know, if you were an introverted person that really had an ambition, you could run an HOA as long as nobody had a front porch.
Right.
Because you don't have to talk to anybody.
Right.
But you still could be effective.
And isn't your new design, didn't you make sure you put porches?
Well, yeah, Fuller's Landing is a front porch community.
Right. Yeah,
so.
and you make sure, like in the Piper Trail and what you're doing, front porches are important, right, in neighborhoods?
Absolutely.
Well, so like at Piper Trail, you know, the first class of homeowners, residents, were incentivized if they could find someone to live next door to them. That's right. And because we did it as pockets, this first incoming class, they're going to be off to the races. There is no like meeting people. Yeah.
Well, that's sort of
because it was tied to the private market and irrationality. They find me a friend to live next door, and you get granite countertops as opposed to plastic laminate.
So did that
I know
also
somebody.
perpetuate that I want people like me? But you do it. You did it in your own little neighborhood where you've got your brother and your. Is it your?
Yeah, this idea that things are getting in your way is annoying. The difference is I don't think people feel empowered to make these decisions.
It's a mindset.
So I think the bottleneck isn't resources, regulation, any of this.
Okay.
It's education and empathy, and those aren't infinite resources.
Okay, but I would also argue, well, two things. One, I do think there's the issue of accessibility and affordability, but also I think when I look at all this and I think about the zoning issues and just in my own little project, and I talked to Andrew and he said, no, you can't do it, or and when I talked to you about which areas and what I've got to look at, and there is a tremendous amount of bureaucracy and I think there are so many roadblocks. So I imagine, I think that's not just, it's not just education, and there's so much more, because I just feel like it's just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. You make 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and I don't know.
It goes back to, I think, Zach makes a really good point that community leadership is difficult, and like in the example of the CDCs, they were paid.
CDCs are the
community development corporations in Indianapolis. They were paid staff who ran operations designed to create community, to revitalize.
Did it work?
It was very effective, and over time, they made some decisions, policies, to put it all through one organization or a couple of organizations, and again, it just really does tie back to reciprocity. I do believe it's you have to have that loop of giving and taking going on constantly.
Do we have that here? So how are we? Do we have a CDC? How are we? Are we good at reciprocity?
You can't just have one. I think neighborhoods are their own little ecosystem.
And we have, according to Palermo, we have over 420 neighborhoods, although I had this conversation with Michelle Chambers, the city council. I was debating with her, how do you define a neighborhood? Because
you don't get to.
I just don't. But
you don't get to.
You know.
So,
regulator.
That's not how it works.
Setting policy.
It's a blessing.
But I don't understand how people who live where they have to drive everywhere and they have to leave their little to get to the store.
And they don't understand why you have a dog. That doesn't have anything to do, but it has nothing to do with it. It just doesn't.
Okay. So partly when you talk about mindset and stuff, so part of it is my own mind that I don't what I'm judging as a neighborhood or not, right? So but what do we do about that?
I think our community can really benefit, and we're starting to see this, is more formalized CDC-oriented entities. There is a limit. And
is that like what Southeast is doing now with the Southeast Development? Is that what you say is more?
You need structure.
Yeah, it needs to be there are limitations. So in NeighborLink, we're collecting all the things that no one else was doing and putting it up on the web platform and trying to mobilize neighbors to help each other. And there will always be a limitation in which neighbors can activate and serve the whole as a neighborhood in terms of time, capacity, resources to do things. There's a role for every neighborhood to grow and be potential and throw events and collaborate and help each other mow their grass and those things. But then there are bigger projects that require sophistication, research, all these things you're expressing that are challenging. There needs to be a formal entity and that are really good at making sure that neighbors feel cared for, are connected, are listened to, not just a developer coming in and hosting a couple of meetings and saying that they pulled the neighborhood, because they don't go house to house.
Right, and I argue how many did they really, like with Southeast, when you look at how many they really.
But if they had that entity, I believe developers would not only go in, they'd listen, they would do, and they would line it up with QAP or whatever.
But that goes to my whole belief of the communication component of this, and the dissemination and the education and how we engage the community. If the community doesn't know that these things are even there or happening.
Well, the community does. I believe that the community knows more than we give them credit for. Our neighbors know 10 times, 100 times more than anyone gives them credit for in our community, because they live it every day. They see who and what is different every day on their pattern to and from work, walking their dog. And we're just not incentivizing as a community the informal structures and the formal structures required to allow the ideas and the initiatives to come from the neighborhood rather than the outside ideas.
But that's what I mean.
That's true empowerment.
But that was what I was talking about from the federal top-down versus grassroots.
But I think that's where the federal is what it is. I believe that the local community, and where we've seen this work really well, is the local city level and potentially even state level understand that the community and the people that live in these neighborhoods have what we need, and we need to incentivize them by giving them an organization or giving them resources to solidify and incentivize them to be connected, to bring the data to them, and allow the best ideas that are vetted because of the research to get the funding, because they will ultimately be adopted, owned, and be exactly what that community needs and wants.
Which is the perfect example when you worked in the Mount Vernon Park neighborhood with Javier, and you built those houses there. That was really a perfect example of what you're talking about. But they also had a strong leader, and then he reached out, right?
Well, I mean, it was a confluence of a lot of things. We had a funder in Scott Glaze that said, I'll give you money if you figure out how to work together. He's a great community builder. You guys should be a great residential home builder. Figure it out and come back and I'll write a check, right? And so that was the impetus behind it. And then you go in there and Javier had resources. He had land that he was willing to let us build on, right? And then it was a healthy tissue community. Crime rates were on the decline over the past 8 years.
He's lowered it in 10 years, 70%.
Property values were higher than Oxford, for instance. Now we can start working on building a house at a profit, or at least sustainably building as an organization, a redesign, and everything lined up perfectly. That house cost us $73,000. We were just able to close on it probably 4 weeks ago. The individual was finishing the program, so they were renting until they concluded. That house appraised for $100,000.
But didn't you have to push to really get it appraised at that amount, or no?
No.
You're seeing, well, that's the whole other argument, because when I've talked to Scott Glaze, the issue is when we looked at trying to build these houses is how much mortgage can someone afford? And even with
that's like going into a car dealership and say, what do you want your monthly payment to be?
Right.
That's the wrong way to look.
See, that's what, right.
Yeah, so anyway, there's a lot.
But the fundamental thing that you said was figure out how to work together. Do you think that all of these entities, and you as the thought leaders and who I think are really innovative, do you think that Fort Wayne and all of these different entities, are we working together? Are we doing it this way? Are we collaborative? And what would this entity look like that could help the HOAs and all of? Is it a separate entity, or that helps, be the staff, or what would it be? Or am I just creating more problems?
Well, I think there's tiers to it all.
What you're doing is what the federal government, state government, everybody does. There's no panacea for this.
Okay.
It's a tiered approach based on the solution that's needed. I think that there are some neighborhoods. I haven't been in a neighborhood in Fort Wayne where I haven't been connected to established leaders who have played the role that we're discussing for years, decades, who are past their time in leadership and or were disincentivized or disempowered along the way because they weren't rewarded, it didn't happen, and they just got tired. You have empathy, you engage with them, you give them a bit of resource, and they'll jump back in. So for me, that's like low-hanging fruit with the right people who care, who want to listen, who will give some resource and structure to help that happen. That's one level that has to be just the reconnection. And then there's another level of neighborhood engagement beyond that may be trying to partner with their next couple of organizations. And then there's like PAPA, who is the Packard Area Alliance, which we should be funding them and helping them.
The
Packard Area Planning Alliance.
Packard Area Alliance.
Which is an entity that's trying to develop 07, or it's been there for a while, but it's like 13 neighborhoods.
So it's like almost a little, right.
We should be, as a community, going to them and saying, how do we get you a full-time executive director?
Okay.
Because you are at the cusp that the only way it's going to grow further is if you put full-time professional energy into it.
But where would that lie within our current government, or who would own that?
So I think,
it would be a private entity.
Don't put the government into it.
Okay, take them out. All right.
Yes.
So the city would be out of this.
No, initially. Initially, yes. I think
they could fund
through a grant. So what would this look like?
Yes.
What is this, a group? What is this called?
Well, what I'm seeing in other communities is there are major employers that are very interested in talent attraction and retention who would like a Glaze get involved in something
because
like this.
So
get that core built, then go to the city and ask for support.
And when you see, like, when you're working on projects and like the landing, and I mean, was that motivated from the private sector, or that wanted to create it and had a vision? I mean, because the model group, Bobby is very visionary in terms of this third place community, and he really wanted those to be starter apartments.
Yeah, but you got to give credit. The Downtown Development Trust, as the arm from GFW, is the one that acquired all the land. A developer like Model, as innovative and progressive as they are, would not take the due diligence to acquire 7 buildings and sit on them until he had all of them.
So do you think that maybe this would be an entity that could live under an academic, like in a university maybe, to create and bring this together? Or could it be the four of you as thought leaders create this thing? No?
Yeah, it's got to be from within. Look at Javier. The only reason he was successful is because he set up his life.
But you also need to have someone with expertise that walks alongside you, right?
Well,
no, I don't. So I think we're talking about this at the wrong scale.
Okay.
I think most people perceive the limits of their neighborhood by the geographic constraints of their everyday routine. Meaning, some people that live in the same neighborhood would tell you the boundaries of it are very different.
Correct.
If I'm an 85-year-old, it's maybe 3 houses one way or the other. You know, if I'm 20 and I ride a bike, my neighborhood's much
Is the
bigger
city.
in my mind.
Right. Like my neighborhood's the city.
So the idea of neighborhood is an individual perception.
Okay. Going back to mindset.
Well, and just physical opportunity. I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure there was a time in my life where this neighborhood felt bigger than it does today.
Right. And depending, like if you're, 14, it could be very small because you
Correct.
can't,
Especially if mom won't let you leave the yard. I mean, then your neighborhood's the yard. The other part of that is that those neighborhoods, in their infinite iterations of how they're perceived, need to have a collection, I would argue, of legitimized local leaders. And that legitimacy comes from the group. It doesn't get self-appointed from the city.
Okay.
There's none of this. And that, I think, is the result of this idea of reciprocity. And the only way you get that way is you have to provide platforms for reciprocation, which is why public space is so important. They need spaces to interact. I need a spot to earn a reputation. I can't earn a reputation without repetition.
right.
Right? So this idea, if I'm stuck in my home and then it's hard that I can't find a doctor, a dentist, a job opening. I don't know anybody. And there's no way for me to know anyone, especially in a neighborhood, without a reciprocal platform,
Okay.
like a sidewalk, a porch, a third place. That's where their power rests. And they're infinitely more powerful when they're operated by people that are within the neighborhood,
Okay.
not outside.
Okay.
So it's important to say, right?
So good,
So
yes.
it's important to, when we say, what does this community need? They don't need anything. What they're looking for is the opportunity to self-manage and govern their own public realm.
Okay.
So Southeast doesn't need a coffee shop. They need someone to want to run a coffee shop.
Yes.
They want someone that needs to be inspired and taught how to do that sustainably.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
And the constraints of
Okay.
what's keeping them from it
So,
to
but,
be removed.
all right, but does also the role, let's look at zoning. Does zoning play a role in limiting your ability to self-govern or,
It can.
okay, in Fort Wayne, do you think it does?
No, we have you could always do better.
Okay.
But like downtown is
Yeah, I think
the
it's
Wild Wild West. I mean, you can do almost anything you want, which is by design. By design. We rezoned our corridors so that they could be a lot more progressively redeveloped. Still have some issues that you probably could argue could be improved from the residential side, especially in R1 zonings.
yes.
Which would be talking about this whole idea of the missing middle housing, and we talked
Primarily
about that.
accessory dwelling units, but
What?
accessory dwelling units. So
Accessory, oh, right, which they just passed in Chicago.
Yeah.
That now if you have a coach house or something, you can make that
Correct.
a livable.
And the benefit of that is it helps dissolve monocultures. It
Right.
instantly inserts diversity.
But it also helps with, if you can do that, because like we were saying, you get then also, not only can you afford the mortgage, but then you could have a rental
And have an
property.
income-generating
And then you have
property.
income, and if you are the owner and you owner occupied, you can do this under a regular single-family home mortgage.
Correct.
So I mean, why isn't Habitat looking at building houses like that instead of single family?
Because a family that's 30% AMI wants to be a landlord on
AMI
top of that,
is AMI.
area median income.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, and,
So is it-
and
okay.
honestly,
I know that's-
I've been in the job for 24 months, so we're just trying to figure out how to build profitably.
so good.
Right, right. But I'm just asking. I mean,
Gonna brew a
but
good cup of coffee.
why isn't it in these like affordable housing developments that everybody's talking about? Why are they all
Because
single?
nobody wants them. If they want them that bad, we'd figured it out.
But why doesn't anybody want? I think it's the smartest thing. I don't know. What do you think?
One of the strategies that I was working on was to help older adults transition from their old home that is no longer safe, adaptable, working for them, yet are able to continue living as a productive member of that neighborhood who desires that. How do I build a house for them and then potentially help their income solution by also creating
Right.
the accessory dwelling? They're homeowners, they've been able to
Right.
capable, it's about lifestyle.
Right.
That would not be all that over.
No, because what I think is like for a lot of those people, if you had a little efficiency, like a grand in-law apartment. See, what I was thinking if I was, because I'm not married, I don't have children, I have to think about my own, what's going to happen. I'm thinking, well, I could have a little apartment and then I could rent it to a student. and then they could be there to help me and, you know, keep me company.
And accessory dwelling units are really popular in robust college towns.
Right. Right. And also what I was saying is why I'm so interested in this multi-dwelling. You don't have to have a big lot where you have to have like a separate like entity, because in the 1940s, Sears Roebuck's had these, they looked like a regular single family house, but they could have two, and they actually could be built on lots that were either 50 feet or 40 feet. So, and that's this whole idea of this missing middle. But do you think that when you say if people wanted it, we would build it, but I also argue sometimes people don't know what they want. I mean, I don't think people understand that it's not like you have to be like a landlord or take out a different loan. I mean that may go back to education, mindset.
This is the free market conversation. We're on the cusp. I imagine in the next few years there will be a developer that has a redevelopment mindset for our neighborhoods who will look at the former fourplex brickstone, the accessory dwelling, and they will figure out, because the market,
I'm trying to hopefully be that with people like you.
Well, I think it's also the mix of vision and the developer. And in our community, there hasn't been enough people looking at redevelopment, and the ones that are working within traditional systems to get them going. And I think they have ideas that as they begin building their experience will start pushing the boundary with the type of things that they'll develop.
So do you think also that maybe the way for developers should do it, or is to go and meet with the HOAs and talk about
we keep talking about the developer.
I mean the people.
Why wouldn't we encourage more grassroots developers to grow out of our neighborhoods? Okay. Because I mean that's really what's working in a lot of larger cities.
Right, but it's very like I feel like, because it's sort of I'm trying to do this, and I've never built or done anything else in my life, and there's so much I don't know, and I feel very overwhelmed, and you know, like I sort of wish like there was a course like I could take. You know, like I thought about, should I get my real estate license? I mean, but I'm saying to help them, to have someone who walks alongside me.
Well, Sarah, I think for like the neighborhood that I'm coming out of at Williams Woodland and the adjacent neighborhoods, because we have enough relational and social connectivity and commitment to one another through a neighborhood association, that if our neighborhood association, there was enough of us that really wanted to add accessory dwellings to our homes and rebuild our garages, for instance, we have enough influence that we could build the coalition of neighbors that are required
to do it,
to build enough package to go to the city and say, for these areas, here's how we're going to do it, and could get it going. Like to Heather's point of how could we be developers? Because the process, the door is open. You can learn how to do these things. It's whether or not the neighbors really want to do it.
Or like the neighborhood that Burley, the one that's behind like where McDonald's is, where that Rudy's cigar places, and they actually got together, because you've noticed on that street, like where McDonald's is, it's not such a, I mean, you know, it's like the street with McDonald's and a gas station, but they actually got together and bought up these houses and then redid them, and now they're selling them, I mean, 300,000.
Van Wert, Ohio just bought their whole downtown.
What did you say?
Van Wert, Ohio just bought their whole downtown.
Van Wert,
Ohio.
The city just bought it?
Community Foundation bought 36 buildings, something like that.
And what are they going to do?
Redevelop it.
Yeah.
Under local controls.
Yeah.
So is that, so that's an example of, so how do we, so with all of your expertise and how do we make this happen? I mean, what do we do to help these neighborhood associations or help people, you know, understand how to, you know, be first-time home buyers and that this isn't their first home? Or how do we create the neighborhoods and that people would want to live in? And how do we do this? Where do we, I mean.
Well, if we're talking about local,
yeah, we're talking local.
We wouldn't have a housing shortage.
But do we have a housing shortage because of accessibility or affordability?
No, there's no houses for sale. They're fully occupied.
Because like in certain areas, we haven't built new homes in 10 years.
Indiana is the only state in the Great Lakes Plains area that had a positive in-migration last year.
Okay.
That's it.
And that's significant because it shows that we're growing.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And attracting people. Actually, I think the largest attraction site was California. It wasn't like we're stealing them from Michigan.
Right. Because people are also realizing, with especially the last year, they can work anywhere, and they do want to be close to major cities with under a period of time, right?
Well, I think you have to give the community credit. We're also providing a product that people are willing to pay more than they're appraising for, which isn't unique to us. But at the same time, we're outcompeting all these neighboring states.
But you never heard that before. I mean, I sort of feel like the perception of Fort Wayne.
It's happening in Southeast Fort Wayne as well. So, I mean, it's happening everywhere. If it's happening in Southeast, we know we're on an upward trend.
That's a great indication for Andrew's house. It's appreciated, significant amount in a short period of time in a neighborhood that everyone would say is not going to happen. So
it's your assessment. I'm going to go down the line. Give Fort Wayne a grade on how we're doing with this idea of letting it be a grassroots and redevelopment. How give it a grade?
I don't necessarily have a grade. I think we are primed for some really great innovative things in the next 4, 5, 10 years based on the last 13 years. And when I started in this conversation, and Heather was a huge advocate helping me understand this to where we were at in 13 years, like there's an incredible amount of momentum. I just think we are collectively trying to figure it out. And there's been more and more collaboration in the last couple of years in terms of organizations coming together and at least beginning to have the discussion, which I think is an important part to come up with new strategies.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't hold you to a grade.
Okay, thank you. Because I was thinking the same thing,
Right.
but I would agree and actually would say that it's been great leadership in the community that had the foresight. I mean, you're going back, 10, 15, 20 years where we decided the downtown was going to come back. We decided that and put a plan in place. And then, great organizations, but government didn't play as big a role in all of this as our nonprofit partners and the Glazes and others who, Ash, who would invest in a downtown and invest in that vision to bring it to pass, Model Group and otherwise. So I do believe the best is yet to come. So you would also, I know your big thing is like we decided. That's a mindset, so that we have the ability, so the mindset to do this. And I'm seeing Southeast do it now.
Right.
So.
And Zach?
I think given the resources and tools at their discretion, I think the city's done a commendable job. I think they don't have the power and influence that we're talking about in this discussion. I think it's more granular than that. I also think that in the immediate future, we're going to have to better understand the difference between underserved and improperly served. Underserved assumes that you're just not getting what everyone else got, and if you did, you'd be better off.
So good.
But that's not the problem.
Now you see why I like.
Fair is not equal. That's right.
Well, and the problem is that they've been improperly served, meaning they need something different. And I'm yet convinced that I know how we're going to get there and what resources you would need. But I think that's the challenge.
And Andrew?
I'm incredibly optimistic as well. I mean, just over the last 2 years, I've encountered just such a willingness to partner and to share and to impart knowledge and a patience to figure it out and a commitment to being successful. I mean, from City of Fort Wayne, other not-for-profits, from Rick Zaire, Kevin Biggs, Jamie Lancia, Mark Heller, all these guys that want Habitat to be wildly successful because they know if we are, the city will be, and when the city's wildly successful, they're going to be wildly successful.
Right. Well, I'm glad that we can end on a positive note. That really makes me feel good about where Fort Wayne is headed. And as you know, at the end of each And Good Company program, I usually ask guests these questions that were popularized by Marcel Proust from a Victorian parlor game. But since now Zach has now been sitting at this is his 5th time at the table, and you all are coming in at your 3rd time at the table, I had to change the format of the questions. So I'm coming up with these would you rather questions, which is really another great way to get to know you, and it are designed to make you think. So I'm going to start with Andrew over here. Would you rather be able to read minds or predict the future?
Predict the future.
Heather, would you rather marry the most attractive person you've ever met or the best cook you've ever met?
Well, I'm married.
He's both attractive.
He's great.
Okay. This is really an either or though, but Zach, would you rather live in a house haunted by friendly ghosts or be a ghost reliving your average day after you die?
Friendly ghost.
Okay. Andrew, would you rather be invisible or be able to fly?
Able to fly.
Zach, would you rather be stranded in the jungle or in the desert?
Jungle.
Heather, Would you rather lose your long-term memory or your short-term memory?
Short.
Andrew, would you rather visit the International Space Station for a week or spend a week in a hotel at the bottom of the ocean?
Space station.
Heather, would you rather live a peaceful life in a small cabin in the woods or a drama-filled life in a mansion in a big city?
Cabin in the woods.
Zach, would you rather find your soulmate or your calling?
Oh, soulmate.
Andrew, would you rather have fortune or fame?
I would say fortune.
Zach, would you rather be able to speak any language or be able to communicate with animals?
Any language.
Heather,
Oh, God.
would you rather be beautiful and stupid?
Are you saying that?
No, that's what I gotta qualify. And I also want you to know that these are just random, that I did not pick who was getting which
Sure, I
question.
didn't get that one.
Would you rather be beautiful and stupid or unattractive but a genius?
I'll take unattractive but a genius.
Andrew, would you rather lose the ability to read or the ability to speak?
The ability to read.
Okay. Heather, would you rather spend a year entirely alone or a year without a home?
Oh, entirely alone.
Zach, would you rather want to be in a zombie apocalypse or a robot apocalypse?
Robot. That Walking Dead grosses me out.
Me too. It's kind of scary.
Robot.
Andrew, would you rather travel the world for free for a year or have $50,000 to spend however you please?
Travel.
Okay. Zach, would you rather be in history books for something terrible or be forgotten completely after you die?
Forgotten.
Heather, would you rather be the absolute best at something that no one takes seriously or be average at something well respected?
Average.
Okay, Andrew, would you rather have people spread a terrible lie about you or have people spread terrible but true tales about you?
Oh my goodness, are those different? A lie.
Okay. Okay. Heather, would you rather lose all of your friends but keep your best friend or lose your best friend and keep the rest of your friends?
Oh, keep the best friend.
Okay. Zach, would you rather be able to take back anything you say or hear any conversation that is about you?
Oh, I probably would benefit being able to take things back.
Okay. Andrew, would you rather have skin that changes color based on your emotions or tattoos that appear all over your body depicting what you did yesterday?
Yeah, you put a lot of thought into that one. I guess my emotions changing my body color, and they'd probably always be red.
Okay. Well, I want to really thank you, because as I said to you before when we started this, that this two-part conversation was exactly why I wanted to do this program. And I also appreciate that you challenging me and getting me to think differently. And I do hope even you will come back, Andrew, and we can continue this conversation. And as you create the alliances, and I am going to look forward to hearing about the conversations that you all have at different tables than this one. So I really want to thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sarah.
And you can learn more about Ann Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at anngoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.